Alright, this is going to be a tutorial for stadiums on PES19, and this time it's going to be a bit different from the previous tutorials, because as you can see, there's really nothing in the stadium section on the Blender tutorials wiki page. There's just the preparation, but no actual text tutorial so far. And that is because I honestly think that it's going to be easier to follow along on video, and it's definitely going to be easier for me to explain things while I'm porting a stadium and then just talking over the process, instead of sitting down for a couple hours and trying to get a step-by-step text tutorial going. So it's going to be video first, and then hopefully at some point a text version for the step-by-step. But what the wiki page does have is the preparation section, and it's a long one for this one, because unlike for team aesthetics like player heads and boots models, there is no automated compiler for stadiums on PES19, so we're going to have to do a lot of this stuff by hand. And the first tool that we're going to need is the GZS tool, as it says, for unpacking and repacking, mostly FPK files for our purposes. And we are going to be using this in this tutorial. This is one of the fundamental tools you will need, so absolutely grab this one. Fox tool is a bit more optional. I actually don't think we're going to need this during this specific tutorial, this specific stadium port. But if you ever go a little bit deeper into stadiums, if you ever want to change the stadium lighting, for example, want to tweak around with that, if you ever need to load more FMDL files than the default 5 models that the files in the template load, then you will have to deal with Fox2 files, and that's what the Fox tool is for. So, not going to be used in this tutorial, but you will need this in the future, most likely. PES file tools is another absolutely necessary one. We need to be able to convert our DDS textures to FTEX so that PES19 will be able to use them. And this is another thing where the aesthetics compiler has been doing this for people for such a long time. Now, I think nowadays the aesthetics compiler does use PES file tools for the conversions, but we are going to have to do this manually. So PES file tools is the texture conversion tool of choice. Then PES15 CPK export. It does say PES15 in the file name, but this works for PES19 as well. The CPK file format has not changed in years. And this allows us to make our own CPK files, make our own DLC, so that we can eventually get the stadium files into PES for testing. The PES19 Stadium ID Changer tools is for changing the stadium slot of the entire stadium folder, which is also going to be necessary because the template files are in stadium slot 60, which is VG stadium, so we can't really be overwriting that. We are going to have to change the slot of our stadium, and this will do it automatically. We won't have to go through hundreds of files by hand to change the numbers. So absolutely grab this one. And then finally is the PES19 Stadium template, which it has one single FMDL file that has all the useful... It's got all the properties and all the textures and so on already set. So we'll be able to transplant all of those useful properties onto the tens of stadium meshes we're going to have to be dealing with when porting or making stadiums. So once you've got all of this, it is finally time to locate the stadium that we want to port or make. And I'll note this now, I am going to be porting an existing stadium. It's going to be Let's not open that. It's going to be Sand Casino, big surprise, but that's the one I'm most familiar with, so it's going to be easy for me to port that while also full focus talking over what's happening. But if you have a source model that has never been in PES, if you're not porting an existing PES stadium, it's going to be completely fine. Because the first part of this tutorial, I am going to be just setting up the PES19 stadium. I'm going to import the model files, I'm going to give them textures, and so I'm going to prepare them for eventually exporting them into PES19. So it's going to be completely fine if you have another source model. And for that, all you need to do is, again, lay it out and give it textures and so on. You should be able to follow along and get some use out of the process, at least. But I am going to be porting an existing PES16 stadium, at least for now. So, Sand Casino, I had to double check, but it's on slot 37. I want to say this is the VGL14 stadiums pack, so I will find the right files. Almost everything we need for porting a stadium from 16 or 17 to 19 will be located in stadium. So I'll find 37. And again, almost everything we need is going to be either in model or in texture. So I'm going to copy both these folders and drop them down to my working folder. And another thing I like doing is if I go into texture, these 4 folders are completely useless. They have pretty much only the light maps, which are no longer a thing on 19, at least not in this form. All the textures that we're going to need are going to be in common, and they are going to be the ones called text_bm_ and then a number. So these 14 textures are the ones I'm going to need. These are the ones that are going to actually be used for the stadium itself. So what I like to do is I'll just copy these as well. I'll make a new folder called something like text and dump them here for slightly easier access. And then now we've got our textures, so we also need to figure out which model files we need to port. Because if I go into the model folder, there's a lot of stuff in here. Especially for Sand Casino, it's a bit of a weird setup where there's several copies of the same model files. So we need to figure out which one of these we need to import into Blender and port over so that we don't accidentally end up porting stuff that exists as a model file for whatever reason in the files, but that PES 16 or 17 actually does not load, and that is just not used for the stadium. So to do that, in the stadium folder of the original stadium, I'm going to find st_nf.xml and open that. And there's going to be 3 model files for this stadium. So I'm going to look at the path and find my model folder. There we go. And they are going to be in the NF folder. And then they're going to be back 1, center 1, and left 1. Yep, all of them here. So those are the models that we're going to be porting over to PES19. Front 1 and right 1 are completely useless, so I won't delete them, but I'll just keep in mind that those don't need to be imported into Blender. So, with that, we've got our textures, and we now know which model files we need to port over. So it's finally time to get to Blender, where I've got leftovers of a previous attempt of recording this video. OBS crashed. Big fan. Spent like 1.5 hours on that. And in here, now, disclaimer, getting into stadiums, I assume that people already have a basic understanding of 4CC aesthetics, how Blender works and so on. So in the preparation section for stadiums, I did not include the 2 Blender plugins that are going to be used, because I assume that people already have those. But as a recap, I've got the FMDL plugin, and I've got the new PES.model file importer, and this is the one that can only import instead of the more extensive model tools that were actually used for 16 and 17. So, using the model importer, I am just going to find my model files. They were in NF, and it was back one, center one, and left one. Alright, that's looking correct. And now, for porting stadiums, the biggest problem is going to be figuring out which texture goes where, because if I expand the parents here, you can see that all the meshes have really not very descriptive names. Mesh underscore ID and then a number. And if we combine that with the fact that our textures are also very not descriptive, text BM and then a number. Now, again, I'm very familiar with Sand Casino, so I know where the textures go. But if this was a stadium that I'm not familiar with at all, matching texture to mesh would be basically impossible. Luckily, there is a workaround for this, and this is why I'm using the new model importer. If you swap into the data tab and go all the way to the bottom, there will be the material name of that mesh, and that is going to be very important for matching the textures to the correct meshes. So we can see that for back one, the first mesh has a material name of bank. So if I go back to the files of the stadium we're porting and open sd_nf.mtl, and again, it's still open from a previous attempt, I can see that the material name bank matches the texture number 1. So text BM1 is going to be the texture for our mesh ID 0 for our model back one. Now, another thing I like doing for clarity's sake is I really don't like these file names. I'd much rather that if anyone ever has to work with the stadium after it's ported, the file names and the mesh names and the materials and so on would be at least a little bit descriptive. So what I like doing is I'll rename this texture to be bank.dds after the material name of our mesh. Now I'm going to keep on doing that for all of the meshes as we go on, but I'm just going to drag this Explorer window off to another screen. I don't think OBS is going to be able to pick that up, but I'm only going to be renaming textures in that window, so it's hopefully going to be easy to follow along. And now, with our texture renamed, I'm just going to assign it to our mesh, give that bank.dds, and then just work my way down the list. This one's hospital, and if I swap into Notepad++, I can see that hospital wants texture number 2. So I'll rename that to hospital and swap back in and assign the texture, and I'll just keep on doing this. One stairs. And you might have already noticed, but as you go down the list, especially inside the same parent as you go down the list, it will be in the same order as the materials are in the MTL file. So once you've made it to about halfway of center, for example, you can just start guessing that, okay, this mesh is probably going to use this texture, but just to drive the point home and just to be sure, I am going to be checking every single texture in the MTL file, which is still viable for a stadium like Sand Casino where there's like 20 meshes total. So stairs is going to be 3. Then moving on to center. Arena. Another thing is back, center, and left. I think these are... yeah, these are still in order of appearance. But if you have front or right, for example, it might be that in the MTL you'll have back one, and then right one, and then center one, and so on. So that's another reason why, especially when you're going from one parent to another, it is important to check back to the file and see that you've got the right material and you're matching it with the right texture. So Arena is going to be number 4. Banner's bow, it's going to be number 5. I'm just going to call that bow for simplicity's sake. And then here's another little catch. Might cause some trouble. Blender's ordering is a bit weird. So you'll have cases where you'll have 10, 11, 12, so on, following 1. 21, 22, so on, following 2. So keep an eye out for this. I'll skip on to 2 so that I stay in order in the MTL file as well. So this is banners broken. And here's another thing, is you can see that banners broken and banners melee have the exact same texture. Now, first of all, I'll rename the texture to be banners, or so I thought. Yeah, Explorer had a moment there. I will rename the texture to be banners, and I will assign it here. And then, knowing that the following mesh on the list is going to have the exact same texture, I'm just going to join it to the one it shares a texture with. Now, especially, let me just unhide that as well. Especially knowing that neither of the meshes needs transparency. They can share a material, they can share a texture, so they can just be in the same mesh. That's going to be completely fine. And it will make things a little bit clearer, where you don't have several meshes that use the same texture scattered around in your model. So moving on with that, there's barrows. That is 7. That is DG. It's going to be 8. It's going to be fences. And there we have another instance. You can even see that the material is fences 0.001. I'm actually not sure why those are separate to begin with, but I can just preemptively join them together. Rename 9 to be fences. And assign the texture. It's going to be ground. OSRS. Accidentally deleted the file. On point with the clicks today. And looping back towards the top thanks to the sorting. It's going to be pillar base. That's another 9, so that should be joined to the fences. Let me just find them again. There we go. Make sure we've got the right mesh and join them together. That's going to be pillars. And that's a different texture again. That's RS3. Another different texture. we've got stands. Alright, and stands and walkway, once again, 09. So I'll join those together. I'll unhide the fences, and the texture name is going to be a bit incorrect, considering the amount of stuff we've got here. It's called fences, but we can live with that for tutorial purposes, so I'll leave it as fences. So that's center one done. We're down to our remaining model file and 2 remaining meshes. So that's going to be house, our final individual texture. And then stairs. Now here's another thing. If I swap to here and unhide the other set of stairs, these two, obviously, as I give this one a texture so that I don't forget, these two obviously have the same texture. Now, this is the one scenario where I'm not going to be joining them together, because they are under a different parent. And the way the back one, left one, center one, and so on work is PES is able to conditionally render stuff, so that if PES realizes that, for example, in a game, the left side of the stadium, anything that would be in the left one FMDL, is actually not in camera view. There is no way that it's going to be visible on screen. The game can just decide, okay, there's no need to render that. And that way we can save a little bit of resources, not having to draw stuff that is not going to appear on camera. So that's the reason why I'm not going to be joining the 2 sets of stairs together, even though they share a texture. It's because I don't want this part being rendered while it shouldn't be visible. And the same goes for this one. So basically they are under different parents, so I don't want to join them together. But with that, we have given all of our meshes textures, we've found the correct pieces, and we are basically ready to start porting stuff over to the FMDL file format. And again, if you're not porting a stadium, if you've got your own model that has not been in PES yet, this is basically the spot where the tutorial actually starts mattering for you. You'll want to have your own model in pretty much the same state. You'll want to have everything laid out. And ideally, you'll want to have a texture on everything. It's not going to matter that much. Just basically know what texture you want to have for each individual mesh. But I am going to start porting things over. So first of all, swap to a now completely fresh Blender window. And this time with the FMDL plugin, find our stadiums template and import the single FMDL file in there. Give it a second, it is surprisingly big. And as you can see, it is a Mahjong stadium. And I chose this one as the template simply because it is a single mesh, and it just, because it's an already existing stadium in PES19, it's got all the useful properties, it's got all the textures already assigned, so it's going to work fine for our purposes. So I'm going to swap to edit mode and move it to the side and then unselect it and swap back to object mode. I'll also find the actual mesh itself in the sidebar here, and then one parent at a time, I'm going to start copying files over. So starting with back one, and I'll keep that in mind, back one. Just paste all of the meshes under that one into our new window. I'm going to zoom in on our template, and then in the list over here, I'll select one by one all of the meshes that I copied over and join them to our Mahjong table, and then press Tab, P, and separate by selection. And that makes them inherit all of the properties of our template stadium. And then once we separate them, they'll be separate meshes. So that's a win-win. I'll do that for all of these. And then once we've got all of our... Once all of our new stadium meshes have been joined and separated to this template, we can delete the template and our meshes are ready for final touches and export. Now, one downside of joining all of these to a single template model is that the materials and their textures are going to be the exact same thing. Now, we don't want that. We want all of these pieces to have their own individual texture and their own individual material. And this is really where the whole process of matching texture to mesh and renaming textures and so on comes in. Because now we'll be able to just go to edit mode and press A, and we'll see that, okay, this mesh has a texture called bank.dds. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to click this number over here to make an individual copy of the material. I'm going to rename the material to be bank. Do the same for the texture over here, make an individual copy of a texture, and rename the texture file name down here to be bank.dds. And now we're done with that single mesh, so I'm going to hide it and just move on. Repeat the same process for all of the meshes we've still got in our Blender window. So this one is going to be hospital. And I simply just like giving the material the same name as the texture if possible. Just have it be at least a little bit descriptive of what the mesh is. Do that for the stairs as well. Just good practice. Check the file name. Make sure that you haven't misspelled it or anything. Even if you know that this is stairs and I would have called the texture stairs. And that was fairly simple, only 3 meshes. So we are ready to export. Now, I again know from experience that none of these need transparency or anything like that. But if you want to give them semi-transparency or a different material or so on, just go through the data and materials and so on tabs and customize them. Everything you need. But I am happy with the default settings, so I will simply just go to the export. Knew this would happen. Back one, yeah. So we are going to want to call this one SD060 back 1, and I'm also going to move it up a folder so that we don't end up overwriting our template model. Save it there and export. This is not going to take long since it's only 3 meshes, and once the export is done, I'll just reload the start file and have a clean slate for our next step, which is going to be center. So once again, select all the meshes under the parent, copy them, import our template model. It's actually not our template model, that's the one we just exported. This is our template model. Move it to the side, unselect, paste. I've lost it for a second. There it is. Blender's doing things, but it's going to be fine. And then just repeat the process of joining our meshes into our template until all of them have been given the template's properties, and at that point we can delete our template. Alright. Now, another thing I'm going to do is just to make sure, even for my own sake, is because San Casino has already been ported to PES19 for the VGL friendlies, I am just going to select, let's take these statues on the side. I will just simply drag them to the middle of the pitch to make sure that what we're working on right now is the actual stadium we eventually end up testing in PES, so that we don't accidentally end up checking the previously ported San Casino and then decide, oh yeah, this worked out, and then it at a later point turns out that, oh, that's not actually the stadium we ported. But yeah, here's our little failsafe, and now we can move on to the process of giving the meshes their textures. So this was going to be Arena. It was already called Arena because, like, the very original template was the San Casino. That should be DDS. There we go. That's bow. Gotta be careful to get the file names correct. It's gonna be RS3. Barrows is our failsafe. That's the slightly unfortunately named fences. But we're going to have that stick for now. Alright, and that's all of them. And once again, I know that these are not going to need transparency or any other tweaks like that, so I can just go here. It's going to be center one, but I'm still going to move up a step so that I don't end up overwriting the nice single mesh stadium template. And this is going to take at least a second longer. Stadiums tend to grow in complexity quite a bit, so might be getting some long export times compared to head models and boots models and so on. Once that's done, once again, have a reload and import the template, and we can move on to the remaining two models. This one's going to be left one. Try and keep that in mind. Delete our reference one last time. This is house. And I know for sure this is stairs. Don't call it DDS though, that's the material. And this one was left one. So go up a step, call it left one, and export. And now, if I swap back to, first of all, if I drag the texture window back to the main screen, there's 3 new FMDL files in our working folder. So we've got our models. The next step would be getting our textures to the right format. So I'm just going to copy all of these, move to the PES file tools. I've modified mine a little bit so that I'll be able to batch convert DDS files. So this might look a bit different. But the point is just convert your DDS files into FTX. I'll cut all of those and I'll just dump them into a folder over here. So that's models done, that's textures done. Next step would be getting our models into FPK files. So for that, we're going to need to dig a bit deeper into the PES19 Stadiums template. Grab sd060.fpk, and while we're here, I'm just going to grab the audience FPK as well. Grab these two. Here's another note. Audience for this tutorial is going to be porting over an existing PES16 or PES17 audience file. There's not going to be an explanation on how to generate the file for new stadiums. That's going to come later. I think that has to be done in the older PES stadium plugin for 15, 16, 17, so on. But yeah, not going to be explained here. We're just going to be porting over the existing file for Sand Casino. But I'm going to grab these and locate GZS tool, and I'll dump these in VGL15 and tutorial, and run GZS tool and VGL15 tutorial, and that will extract everything that is inside the path that we specified, so VGL15 and tutorial. Now, our model files will go in SD060, so I'll just get all the way to the bottom here. Now, there's only going to be one file by default, and if I find our fresh FMDLs, you'll notice that there's 3 of them. And by default, the files in the template folder will be able to load 5 FMDL files. They'll load back one, center one, left one, right one, and front one. So there is still room for 2 more FMDLs here. And again, if you want to load more, if you need to, for example, load a center 3, in those cases, usually I just join the meshes in center 3 into center 1. But if you want to keep them as separate files, you'll need to tinker with the Fox2 files in sd060.fpkd. That's probably going to be explained in a different bit. Once again, for the purposes of this relatively quick tutorial, I'm just going to leave it at use file names back one, center one, left one, right one, front one. And just trust that these FMDL files will be loaded in the end. So we've got our models in the extracted FPK. And while we're here, going to do the audience as well. Go all the way to the bottom of the Audi area. And the bin file that's in there can be found in the stadium files for PES16. So if I go to Audi, area 37 is Sand Casino, and then data, that's going to be a bin file. And we can just straight copy that over and replace the one in the template. And now we've replaced everything that we need to replace. So I can just... Another thing I only just noticed, and I actually didn't do this in the previous take, so it's a good thing that OBS crashed. Since we had more files in here, since it wasn't just center one. We also added back one and left one. If we're going to need to modify the XML a little bit as well. So, as you can see, the XML currently only loads one file, and this, if you've worked with head models, you'll recognize how this works if you've ever had to modify the face XMLs for 19. So I'm just going to duplicate this entry a couple times and remind myself that we have back one and left one, and that will just make GZS tool pack those files into the FPK once we have a repack. So I'll save that and have a repack. And repacking works by specifying the XML file. So st060 fpk.xml, and just to show that it's working, I'll delete the original FPK files, and you can see that it builds them from the decompiled source. So I'll also have audio area. Copy both of these and move them back to where they belong. Audio area does not go there, it goes here. And with that, our models are in the correct place, in the correct format, and we have an audience. Next up, we can move our textures in the right spot. So I'll grab all the ftext files from here. Keep on going to the wrong folder. Dump these in source images. And for the purposes of what we're doing here, we are ready to get this packed into a CPK and try it out in PES. Now, there's a couple of things. For example, the thumbnail. It just so happens to be the thumbnail for Sand Casino in the Stadium's template by default, so that's not going to be there's no need to change that. I could actually. I have the VGL thumbnails. Yeah, just to show that this part works as well, I'll copy a VGL thumbnail over here, call it 060. So if you want your thumbnail to work, just replace the file in here in render thumbnail stadium, and make sure that you keep the file name as st060. So we really are ready to have a compile, and for that purpose, first of all, we will need to move the stadium to a different slot. It is still on 60, which again has VG Stadium on it already. So for this, the PES19 Stadium's wiki page recently did get updated, so I want to say this is still up to date on which stadium slots are open, and we want to focus on the bolded ones because those are the ones that work for stadiums. I don't think we've been able to make any of the extra stadium slots actually show up. So have a look at the list, find a random one that is both bolded and open. I'm just gonna pick 43 just randomly. So that's going to be the ID of our stadium, and for that purpose find the PES19 Stadium ID changer. It wants to be an admin, so let it run as admin. The IDs are going to be automatically filled once you select folder, so enjoy this part. It does not remember where you last visited, so you have to find the full path every single time. And I've, of course, buried all of my stuff under like a million subfolders, so our stadium files are going to be in template, and when browsing, you'll need to select the parent folder of asset and common. So again, looking in here, we move all of our files into the template folder and into the asset and common folders here. So I'm just going to select template, and it is going to autofill the old ID to be 060, which is what we want. That's what it is for the template. And I want it to be 043. So once you've filled in the new ID, you can extract archive, and this is going to take a second, since it has to extract all of the as it's saying, it has to extract all the FPK files and decompile Fox2 and so on. Change ID and pack archive are going to be a decent bit faster. And another thing I hate about this tool is you run it once, you go through the process, and you're just done. It just closes. And if you want to, for example, if we find out that 43 does not work out, we want to change it to a different slot, you will have to run the tool again and find your Stadium files again and so on. But it beats doing all of that by hand, so we'll live with it for now. And finally, we can get all of this packed into a CPK, and we can try it out in PES. So I'm going to copy both asset and common, and I'll move them to PES15 CPK export. Now, this is a completely fresh copy. I have not changed anything. I downloaded this just before starting the recording, so I'll go through the initial setup for the tool as well. For convenience, I'll just rename the folder to be stad, and I'll dump all of the files in there. I'll leave the batch file as 4cc_test, and then the contents of the batch file do need to be edited a little bit. So first of all, this here is the name of the folder it targets, so change that to be stad for my purposes. Next up is the name of the CPK file, which for me is going to be 4cc_32_stadiums2. And that is because I don't want to overwrite the actual stadium pack, which is 30 stadiums. So I'm going to use a stadium mid-cup, which is 32 stadiums too. And then change the CPK file name in these lines as well. And optionally, the batch file will also immediately copy your CPK file to where your PES download folder is. So I'm going to find out exactly where my PES download folder really is and change the location in the batch file as well. So save that and open up an admin command prompt so that it will actually be able to move the files and run 4cc test. And the size of Sand Casino is not massive, so it's going to be really fast. It will move the files in a blink, so I can confirm that 1559, it has been updated within the last minute. So the CPK file was built and moved over, and we are ready to test out the ported stadium in PES. So boot up 19, this is going to take a second. 19 is a bit slow. Really taking a second compared to normal as well. Skip all of the intro and all the annoying little pop-ups. And I'll just test A versus A. Find the stadium on the list. I think it's this. I'll just verify on the stadiums list. Yep, 43. The name matches, so this is our ported stadium. So hopefully everything has gotten over just fine. We'll find out in a second while after the game loads. Yep, and as you can see, our failsafe, this is actual live footage. This is not the already ported Sand Casino statues have moved to the middle of the field as well. So our conversion process was successful. So technically that is all for the tutorial. But there's a couple things that you might want to change about the end result. So I'm going to go over those as well. And first of all is, what if I want grass on my stadium? What if instead of just the white pitch lines, I want actual grass to hide the floor of my stadium? And if I close PES and swap back to the template for a second, that is where the alternatives folder, where I accidentally went into a couple times during the entire process, comes into. There's a folder in there called Custom Pitch. Now, to set up for this process, I'm going to delete the entire template folder. I'm going to rename template backup, which the stadium ID changer creates this folder, and it's basically just all of the files you ran it on, but they have not been touched. So they are still, in this case, ID 60. So I'll rename that back to template. I'll grab the FPK files in here, and I'll replace the relevant files in the pitch folder in the template. And then pitch.dds is going to be the texture that the custom pitch model uses. Now, this one is just a completely neutral green. And if you want to, you can just do what people were doing for a long time. You can overlay an image here. You can customize the pitch texture just fine. The only thing to note is that this edge here is basically the goal line. I want to say these edges are going to be the sidelines, and this edge is going to be the other goal line. So keep that in mind when designing the features of your pitch texture. I am just going to simply keep it full green. And with our FPK and FPKD already in place, all that remains is I'm going to copy this over to the texture converter. That's OBS. This is the converter. Grab the FText, and it goes in source images, just like all of the texture files for the stadium. So we've got the FPKs in place for the custom pitch, and we've got the texture, and we can move on to the fun part, which is once again running the stadium ID changer. So I get to find my template folder, have a scroll all the way, there we go, a little bit of a struggle, call it 43 and have an extract. Change the ID and pack the archive and tell it you're done. Hopefully for good for now for this tutorial. And once again, grab the asset and the common from the template. I'll clear out the stad folder completely and paste the asset and common that should now have the custom pitch, and just rerun the CPK builder. And we can retest that in PES. Once again, give it a second to think if it really wants to start again. make your way to a game. Find the stadium. And see if the pitch actually made it over. And there it is. It's a bit of an interesting camera angle that's going on, but if I skip the intro, you can see that Sand Casino magically just grew grass. So that's how you get a pitch that is actually green, or whatever color you want it to be. But the point being, that's how you get a pitch that is not just the pitch lines. Now, one final remaining thing, as I once again close PES, is the template folder does come with an attempt at a kind of a unified lighting config. But sometimes that just looks bad. Sometimes it just does not work out. So one thing you can do, in case you want to experiment with lighting, is, and if you don't want to like dig into the lighting FPKs, is you can just go here, and I'm just gonna, you could delete this, but in case you want to return back to normal, back to what the template had, I'm just gonna rename it so that it is called anything but win. And that should make it so that PES does not load the files in here, and instead loads the default files that the stadium has in PES. So once again, have a recompile. Go into PES, again, hopefully for the final time in this tutorial. It's starting to run a bit long already. While PES is booting up, I'll also set the scene. Both those previous tests for the stadium, they were ran in night mode. So it was nighttime for the stadium, and from experience, there should be a fairly drastic difference in here once we test again in night, but this time with the default PES lighting for the default PES stadium that usually lives in this slot. It is quite a bit darker all around the stadium, and this looks to be a very good stadium slot, so claim 043 as fast as you can. Sometimes nighttime stadiums can have very annoying lighting conditions. They can have spotlights shining all over, and those spotlights are obviously designed for the default PES stadium in that slot, so you might have annoying little points of light all over the field, creating an uneven lighting. But yeah, 43 is looking nice, so this is a good stadium slot. I will back out to select team and show off the daytime lighting in PES, which actually does work. Like in 16, daytime was strictly forbidden, but in 19 it is going to work by default. So I can just load into a daytime match, and you can enjoy the nuclear bright glow of... Okay, that's actually not too bad either. That looks kind of good. That's another problem you might run into. Daytime on some stadiums might be nuclear bright, especially if you've got light textures like the ground or the pillars on Sand Casino. But this is still looking good. Now, daytime's another thing is you're gonna end up having shadows, like you can see in the statues in the middle. But honestly, for this lot, I might even call disabling the template lighting an improvement. Not always the case, but for this lot, it looks good. But for this tutorial, that's about all. That is how you port stadiums to PES19. That's how you get custom pitches. That's how you deal with the sometimes finicky template lighting, and so on. So there's hopefully going to be more, because stadiums is a very extensive topic. There's a lot of like little detail that you can get into. But that's the gist of it. And all I'll say is good luck.